Hello, Franklin. How are you doing?
Good, Dean. How are you?
I am doing well. Welcome to
Good.
my bead store.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm Franklin Marshall with the Oceanic Cities. Thank you for joining us today. We have a dynamic show today. Please don't forget to hit the like and share and show this channel to some friends and leave a comment. We're here today with Dean Smith with Paradise Beads.
Hello, everybody.
How are you, Dean?
I am doing well. We just got a rush in the store, and so we now have time to talk during the lunch lull.
Yes, it's really good. How long have you been doing Paradise Beads?
The Paradise beads, let's see, I moved out of the Capitola Mall from a co-op that four or five of us were in back in the early 2000s. I had a store by Harbor High School in Santa Cruz for about 6 or 7 years, and then the county bought the property and moved me here. So it's been at least 12, 15 years in this location.
Yeah, what's the fascinating thing that you find about beads?
The stories that come with them. People come in with a necklace to repair, and it was great grandmother's necklace when she was a flapper, or they went to India and bought a necklace that was strung on kite string and it made it to the house, but then the cat chewed on it, so they needed to be repaired.
Well,
So,
there's something about beads that most people don't know and understand is the history behind beads. And I've heard you talk about it. Can you kind of expound on beads and the history and, just kind of whatever you can expound upon?
all right. Pre-money, if you were traveling and you needed food, you either ran it down or hunted it down, or you found somebody with food and you offered up a trade of some sort. If you had a skill that could be repairing things or making things, or if you are a finder like I am, you would have then traded something you found. Rocks with holes in them, pieces of wood that were carved and pretty with holes in them, bone that had etches on them from an animal that might have been from someplace exotic, and you did some trading, and that was your currency. Later on, once currency was invented, not all countries had currency. So you would, as an explorer, take your ship and go travel around. You couldn't just give a copper coin to some indigenous person and said, "Here, I want a whole bunch of food because we're hungry." So if you took the polite way of getting things, you would have pulled out your trade goods and started offering items to people. And beads were a thing that could be made once glass was figured out how to be formed into something other than a big molten pile on the bottom of your campfire. And then beads came in, jewelry came in, and that was one of the trade goods.
There's different regions and places that have used beads for a variety of things in the past. There's beads made out of seashells that you make beads out of by grinding them down. Glass that's found at the beach and sea glass.
Right.
What
So
most people, a lot of people don't equate jewelry with beads from the ocean, from seashells being ground down. They see the bead, but they don't realize how it was made.
the local tribes here in California, so I'm walking around to see if I can find my strands of beads that I had here to show you. The coastal tribes will take hard clam shells, a Pismo clam or a Washington clam or the little Olivella shells that are kind of small and look like periwinkles, and grind them on a rock and get a hole in them, or take their drills that they had and with a sharp rock on the end of them and grind them until a hole formed in them, and would make beads to string on a necklace. I have made several beads out of the Pismo clam shells. They are a very thick shell. When the beads are made, they are strung together like a hishi bead, like the old puka shells. They are flat on both ends like a lifesaver. Some of the shells are up to a half an inch thick. Some of the smaller petite shells might just be a couple of millimeters thick. The shell itself would be cracked and broken and worked and ground until it was rounder, a hole drilled through one side than the other because they didn't have metal drill bits. They just had stone or bone with a sand slurry that they worked out of, and it helped erode the holes, flip it over and erode the hole, half the bead one side, half the bead on the other. Then they would string up the beads on a piece of wood or a strand of bamboo, or depending on what the easy material was from that country, and make a 6 or 8 inch length, and then put water on a gritty sandstone or limestone rock, and then work the strands back and forth until they were all ground around smooth, therefore grinding 2, 3 dozen beads at a time until they got them the diameter they wanted. And then they would take the next batch and they would keep going. There are several of us currently that make beads out of clamshells or a soft stone like soapstone, or soapstone, or a serpentine, or anything like pipestone if you're from the Midwest, and start making shell beads similar to these.
Oh, okay.
Our current ones here in California would be white because of the material we had. But if you were inland, you would have used mussel shells or purple lipped clams and made other types of shells. In Africa, there are a different type of shell. There's some bigger conical ones, and they would be big enough to grind a hole in and then inscribe designs on. And I think every culture pre-money had something similar. We know puka shells from the Hawaiian. Everybody has seen those. That is a snail shell that has been eroded and ground down until only the top of the shell is left. And there's a little hole in the middle, either from the sea urchin that ate it the first time or from grinding back and forth into the surf, and it gets strung up. I've seen old fossils of coral fossils. They had long stems on them. They were actually a type of starfish, and when they died and petrified, one of the stems, when it broke into little segments, had a hole naturally through the middle of it, and those were used as beads also, a primitive form of decoration and currency.
What's the history of sea glass?
Most of it is European, an European invention. I do not believe the Native Americans had the technique for making glass. The Egyptians had faience, making it out of sand, but the Romans had glass that they made. And so the countries who had utensils, cups, bowls, chalices, vases, made out of clay or pottery, and then later on glass, when they were traveling, going to different places, if a ship hit shore and broke up and all of the material inside broke and shattered in the waves, eventually it would wash up as flotsam on the beach. But recently, most of the beach glass you get is either from dump sites where pre-environmental regulations, the dumping of a city's trash was in the ocean or on beaches next to the ocean or in pits next to the ocean, and high tides would come in and wash things around and eventually disperse the glass everywhere. If you live downstream of a glass manufacturer, their scrap would have been thrown over the walls of the building or dumped out in the back, and the waves would have come and washed it out to sea and beat it up in the beach, the sand, and washed it back up in the surf. So we have our local area in Davenport where they find a multicolored glass because of an accident that happened decades ago at the glass manufacturer when they had a flood and their whole factory got washed out to sea. And there's tons of colorful glass. There are people who are buying glass, smashing it up, and tossing it into the ocean and hoping to find it when it comes back in a couple of months or years and washes back up on more of a trash situation. It is an accidental, they're on purpose, littering. Mendocino Beach is downstream from one of the old city dumps, and they have a place called Glass Beach, and sometimes it is covered in 2 feet of little tiny glass pebble from it being different tides bringing it in and out, cracking them up, breaking them up, making them smaller and smaller. And there are people who get glass and toss it into the creek upstream in hopes to, they call it replenish the beach. But essentially, they are just throwing glass out into the creek and waiting for it to wash down upon to keep the pretty attraction still there.
Desperation, huh?
Yeah, so it's a very popular thing. I have behind me glass from different color vases that I break up, and
Oh, nice.
pottery, different color alcohol bottles that I trade for. And
this is ocean glass?
this is a handmade version of ocean glass. Ocean glass has a different look and feel to it because of the amount of time it's been in the water. This is standard natural colors you would get: Coke bottles, beer bottles, colors in there: Pepsi bottle blue, Coke bottle white, Corona bottles. different things. So you get a more common color, and the surface of them has a different texture, more pebbly like a gumdrop, whereas the ones that I've tumbled have a more velvety texture to them. It's a smaller container and a different type of grit. Even trying to tumble them in sand gives them this nice, smooth, pretty velvet. The Beach Glass Festival they have here in Santa Cruz once a year. They have people that will look at your glass and let you know if it's authentic or not. They take a microscope to it and look at the little indentations, and they can find out if it's been tumbled in the ocean or in a tumbler. So apparently there's a market for high-end expensive glass being tumbled and sold off as authentic beach glass. And they are now taking new vases and smashing them and tumbling them. And some unscrupulous people will take and throw them out into the ocean and hopes to find one or two pieces and then claiming it's an authentic piece from the ocean and try to get $10 for it as opposed to just a couple of dollars.
What's the difference in the price of the ocean glass versus tumbled glass?
So my tumbled glass is around 25 cents a piece for a nice, pretty piece that you can make something out of. Ocean glass coming out of the ocean, if it is not very pretty and it's kind of rough and has shiny edges on it, is probably the same 25 or 50 cents. But you get a really nice high-end piece of tumbled glass that's nice and thick. Like this is a $5 piece. So that we've already gone up several 100%. But if you lucked out and found a nice one. This one is a piece of scrap somebody threw out recently because it's not completely round. It's not tumbled all the way, but it is ocean tumbled. This one in a good, pretty shape might fetch $25 or $30. And there are some I've seen sell for over $100 in a rare color or a rare size because it was of a certain shape. Our Davenport glass, this one you can see the shine coming off of it. So this one went through my tumbler. They call these mushrooms. They come off the bottom of vases. This is what they're holding on to when they're blowing it on the other end. It gets pinched off. When these are found tumbled and perfect in the ocean, I've seen them sell for upwards of $150 for a nice, perfect one that you can authenticate as being from the ocean. Whereas something like this is probably $5 for its uniqueness. So there is a market for it if
Very
it's real.
interesting. Yes. So, what are the shows like that you go to with beads?
So a standard wholesale bead show will have representatives from a company that makes beads. So if you go to a company, their booth, they'll have 20 or 30 tables. They have beads of all shapes and sizes and material, glass beads, stone beads, wood beads, and they're showing off what you can have made or buy by contacting a company. Some manufacturers only buy stones from around the world and have them shipped in containers to their factory, and they get them cut in slices and then sliced again and then sliced again. So you have these little cubes, and then the cubes get tumbled till they're round. Then they get put into a drill press, and they have multiple drills that'll drill holes through them so they can drill 50 beads at a time. There are wood bead manufacturers who will cut and carve wood beads, one or two beads at a time. So here are some little beads that have been drilled out by hand. You can tell they're done by hand because they're not uniform. They're off-centered and they're a little bit different. They have that look to them. But a strand of handmade wooden beads, common, are usually made in countries that are less mechanically sophisticated, and the beads would be much cheaper to buy than in some places that you'd get them handmade out of a custom wood and you knew the engraver who carved them. So sometimes wood beads are cheaper than stone beads, and a few times you find some really nice wood beads that are twice the price of a stone bead.
Do they make beads out of ebony and mahogany or walnut?
Yeah, anything you want a bead made out of currently, they will make beads out of. There are instructions online selling machines for making your own beads, and they will tell you how to cut your strips of wood to a certain size. So when they finish with the little grinding bits, you get this nice round perfect bead out of any wood that you want. I would assume in the old days those beads existed from the countries that had that wood, but it would not, they weren't made fast. So most of the beads we see as trade beads are inexpensive beads that were made in bulk and traded off around the world. And making an ebony bead once a day and having enough to go around the world to trade would take a while. But a sandalwood bead or a softer wood bead that could be carved quickly, Tulsi wood is a very popular easy to carve wood, and you find their beads in a lot of places. So I'm sure somebody made ebony beads and ivory beads
Can
because wood, and those of us that like to make things will try to make things out of anything they can get their hands on.
can you show us some of the beads and the jewelry that you have there?
Sure. I'm going to pull up some Tulsi wood beads now that I mentioned them. It is a style of bead used in certain religions for their prayer necklaces. They generally have the bark still on them. They are a very simple thing. You've taken a stick and carved out each individual bead and then drilled a hole through them. They would have used little teeny tiny sticks to make little teeny tiny beads. The same country would have a rudraksha bead. It's a seed off of a plant that grows with the softer middle in it, just like a Job's tear, which is a grass with a soft middle and a bead to be made out of. My specialty are either African trade beads, which were beads made in Europe and traded into Africa for spices, ivory, gold, or people. It's probably some other things they traded for. One little tiny bead wouldn't get you a lot, so they would make bigger beads, fancier beads. And I'm sure somewhere is the picture of the that I saw as a kid, pre-internet, of how many beads you'd have to give up for a beaver hide, how many beads you would trade to somebody for an elk hide, how many beads you would trade for the moose antlers from the Native Americans. I'm sure there's a system or museums that have beads that would say these beads were traded pound for gold, these beads were traded pound for spices, and so forth. And so somebody has done research, and hopefully their research is correct. Back here behind me is my stone bead wall. These are beads that used to be boulders of rocks, and they took the boulders, cut them in slices, cut them again into long fingerlings like these, and then they would be cut again into squares. The squares would be rounded off, and then they would be polished, either partially polished or all the way polished, and then holes would be drilled in them. At least that is the current method for doing them. Some beads are just chunks and pieces of stone, leftovers from the cutting process that got tumbled, and someone had to hand drill little holes in. There are pearls. Pearls come from clams and oysters, and then they're heated to get different colors in them or bleached to get them white. And some people say they'll even change the food that are given to the clams to have their colors altered. Most of the pearls we have now are cultured meaning that there's a item placed inside the pearl or the oyster or several items. The great big clam shells that are 12 inches 8 to 12 inches in size, can hold up to 30 pieces of material in there on each side of the clam. And all they have to do is wait a couple of months to a year for them to coat over. Then they pull everything out and then restock the oyster. And they can do this for 10 or 12 years until the lifespan of the clam is finished. And they will put in long, skinny pieces. They can drill them in different directions. I've seen carved shell butterflies, carved shell coins. These are ones that had coin shaped bead inside of them, but they got stuck on the side of the shell and they made a weird shape. I've seen carved butterflies, carved Buddhas, carved elephants, faceted shell beads all put inside and have the coating covering them. So pearls are a fascinating thing all by themselves that I don't know enough about. Let's see. Before we get to the African trade bead, I have bone bead. These are made from different animal bones and carved from India. And these, if you look at them, they look an awful lot like chicken leg bones. I don't know what they're made out of, but they're cut, bleached. Someone carved them. I bet that idea had been around for thousands of years. These are snake vertebrae made out of the inside dried cartilage of the snake. There are fish bone. I've seen petrified versions of these also. Coconut shell. That was a popular thing where there were coconuts and not enough hardwood. The shell itself, the seed, was hard enough to make beads out of. Rudraksha bead, again, very popular in India and anywhere tropical where the shell would grow. Sandalwood wood, very popular. Apparently, fresh sandalwood still has that really nice smell to it, but a non-aromatic wood can be dipped in sandalwood. So now there are people online that are selling authenticated DNA tested wood for sandalwood. It comes with a certificate to prove that it is sandalwood. So apparently that is a very big black market to have fake sandalwood. And here is my African trade bead wall. These are either really good condition old beads made in India or in the Indian Ocean region and traded across, or they are reproductions of those same beads that are out. These are all glass. Most all of these are glass beads. Here, let me see if I can flip around camera. Flip it once on me. There we go. I can sit and talk. These glass beads here were made in Europe in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The machines that made these used to make buttons. And so there were a family called the Prossers that invented a machine for taking hot glass and squishing it into a shape. So the start of the Industrial Revolution, they were smishing out glass buttons and making thousands of them cheaper than they could make wood or shell buttons. And somebody realized that they could also make beads by just poking a single hole in. And so these beads are machine made, and these right next to them are handmade. These are the Padre beads, or they were called Padre beads. The rumor has it the preachers that went and traveled would bring beads with them in order to convert you to their religion and have you go to church. They would give you a handful of beads at the end of each sermon. So you'd come and get beads, and they would get their numbers up for their church. There are tons of handmade, hand wound glass beads. They would make a very large tube, cap it off, get it hot, and pull it like taffy. And the longer and longer the taffy was pulled, the glass rod was pulled, the skinnier and skinnier and skinnier the beads were. So when they originally made this with its little tiny stripes, or this one with its little tiny stripes, they were much bigger stripes and got pulled smaller and smaller. Hundreds of different examples of beads. I mean, they've had glass beads. The Egyptians had a style of glass beads. So that's what 4,000 years now that there's been glass beads around. They just get more and more refined, prettier and prettier design on the big, large glass beads. The French had their version of glass beads. Dutch had their versions of glass beads. The Italians had the most colorful of the glass bead with all the stripes and the colors and the designs. They were very renowned for that in Murano. So some of you have heard of Murano glass. Currently, the African bead market are taking old glass bottles and glass fixtures and smashing them up into powder and then reforming them into beads. There are several really nice videos online advertising the companies that make these beads out of bits and pieces of old broken stuff and heat them up and fuse them together. These are vinyl beads made out of rings of vinyl plastic. They're very popular now. Prior to this, they were made out of record players, usually the old Victrola records that are quite thick and made out of shellac. That was a popular one. But that was all because the coconut shell bead was popular. And it was each generation of manufacturers come up with more and more ways of making beads to look like old beads. These are some of the oldest beads I have in the store. They're from the 1500s. Their nickname is Hudson Bay Trade Bead because they were supposedly brought into Canada and traded in with the Native Americans. They also had a rough white bead that was found with them also that looked like porcelain. I was told that the red bead with the green middle and the white rough beads were found in every indigenous archaeological dig on the planet from the 1500s to the 1800s. So apparently there was a very, very popular bead made in Italy and taken out cheaply to trade with the native people. And then once the Industrial Revolution started up, they had to get more and more colorful because each country would come in and try to buy their good. And if those people already had white and red beads, then they would come up with blue beads or green beads with stripes or polka dotted red beads with little white dots on them. And it became where they needed more and more and more different styles of beads. And so by the mid 1800s, the African trade beads were quite colorful. And in the late 1700s, early 1800s, some of those beads came over to the United States and were traded. And the mountain men or the fur trappers would go out with bead strands to trade with the Native Americans, along with metal knives and pots and needles for sewing and so forth, because the Americas were still Stone Age by the time Columbus came over, and they had not hit an industrial revolution or the Bronze Age even. So they are very old culture, and that's why it was quite easy for the Europeans to come through. because they were muskets and gunpowder versus sticks and rocks. So
Very fascinating.
yes, the more you read, the more you find out about things, and it's just fun and sad at the same time to see how things change.
And it seems the more you get into understanding the details of it, it's a lot more enjoyable.
It is. There are aspects of this that I really like, just to find the materials, the shapes. I've noticed that there are shapes now that you can't find that you could have found in the 80s when I first started doing this as a kid. There are stones that I don't find very often. Either the mines are closed or the country doesn't exist and they've developed over the land and now they have cities there where the pits were where they were digging, or somebody's found a better use for the pretty stones and you don't get them in bead form anymore. And I'm not sure why that is. That's a whole global economy thing that I would never have thought beads were part of. But as I said, they were the money before money was a thing. So I guess they're going to change just like currency does.
How often do you have people going out looking for the beads for you from the ocean, sea glass,
So
shells?
almost every day I'll get a phone call from somebody who knows that I'm looking for shell beads. And they'll say, "Oh, I've been picking some stuff up. I'll come in a day or two and I get a little box of them." I traded for this bin here last week. The lady came in and she picked up some seashells and got some bead. I have a gentleman that came in today, said he was cleaning out his storage unit and he found his mom's beach glass collection and he will go through it and pick out the pretty stuff for himself and his wife and bring me the others. Another lady came in and said her mom passed away and they have a bunch of things that they're not going to want. And she had a large collection of buttons and beads because she collected and hoarded them like all of us good collectors do, is find things and hope someone can use them. So once the family goes through, so I'll maybe get some new beads coming in. So I would say every day someone will come in and ask about them. And then at least once a week, I'll get to trade for. I traded for these this morning. Let's see if I can flip this around again. Nope, didn't go through. Let's try it. These beads came in this morning. A
Oh,
gentleman
yes.
was
Oh, wow.
making a bracelet and he wanted amber colored beads and he had these big carnelian beads here. He
Yes.
bought some green beads from, this looks like the new store up the street, the box store, but they didn't lay the way he wanted them to, so he didn't keep them. He brought back beads that were mine to begin with because I string mine on little wires, and so he said they didn't work for his project. And there's a strand of African trade beads here,
Hmm.
green pressed glass beads, the second version of the Prosser beads. They still have a little bit of a seam in them.
So
And they're
that's
a little,
pressed glass.
that's glass. So this one is glass. That is carnelian stone without a polish on it. A dyed soft stone that they use for carving, but it takes a dye really good. And they're now calling it what they call this one, green dyed imperial jasper stone. So at least they let you know it was dyed. It's not jasper, it's way too soft. It's some other stone, but it's very pretty. And
Yes.
then these are white coral that have been dyed red. And so we have coral, stone, glass, and stone in here. And he wanted some beads of mine. He went through and picked out the glass beads he wanted, and we did a swap. So we do that quite often. This is my sorting piles down here. I've got two sections of a wall. There are glass beads and green beads and blue beads, and then there's a pile of beads that need to be sorted into their color, and then I price them and put them out. And then short ones get strung in those little strands sorry about that, like this, my mini strand.
Yes.
And anything longer would get strung up in a long strand. And anything that's too short, just a few beads, 4 or 5, they would go in the bins that I've sorted by color and by price. So black beads would go here that are of a medium size that I think I could cents a piece for, and then a quarter beads down here. And then I've got a teeny bit more expensive up to $1 and $2. As you can see, they get bigger beads and a fancier material and a fancier shape to them. And it just keeps going and going. So I'm currently between helpers. I had a couple of ladies that would come in once a week and help me sort. And
Yes.
one moved, one went back to college, and the other one now has a baby to take care of. So I'm now interviewing for more bead sorters.
Well, it's like a museum.
It is fun. I was hoping it would be an empty museum. It does not need to be a full museum. I can buy more beads if people buy them from me. I get to go buy them from somebody else. So we've got all kinds of things here in the store, and you can make beads and stuff. I mean, it's driftwood on the wall. You just have to find it and be patient with designing.
So
or maybe not even bother being patient. You just design it anyway because you like it, and then who cares what it looks like?
now that driftwood, that Those are not necklaces. Those are decorations just for the wall.
Just for the wall. I have seen Halloween costumes decorated in driftwood. I am sure there's somebody out there who takes little teeny tiny pieces of driftwood and will drill them and decorate them up and make a pendant or a charm or something out of them. So I guess anything can be an adornment, anything can be clothes. It's just what you have the courage to wear and get away with.
Have you, did you make the driftwood art?
Yes, a friend of mine does the designing. She's been designing for years, used to design for Nordstrom's and make jewelry for them. And they wanted 100 designs a year that they could pick from. And then the next year, she would have to come up with 100 new designs and they would pick from them. Then she'd give them a quote on what it would cost. So she had to do all this work to figure out the financial aspect behind the jewelry and how much everything would cost so she could give them a quote and come up with designs. So people that think they're just going to get rich quick off of jewelry can do so if they are extremely talented, and others of us have to work at it a little bit. But yes, she designs the driftwood. I will go out with her on occasion when I'm looking for my shells off the beach. She will come out with us and pick up the driftwood and help me pick up shells on occasion also. And then she goes home and washes the driftwood and then I set up a drill press for her so she can drill holes in it. And then she'll design. So most of the things she designs, marks where she wants the holes, goes and drills the holes, puts it together to see if her design works. And if it does, then she finishes it up. If not, she pulls the whole thing apart and starts over again.
I was, I was fascinated I was fascinated by the rocks that's washed up on the beach. We went for a walk on the beach the other day, and the stones, the pebbles had washed up. Are those ever used for anything?
Yes, some of the heavier hard stones I've seen people cut up and make jewelry out of, cut in slices and then polish them up and make them into jewelry. We sometimes get a green serpentine they call big sur jade. I've seen people cut and carve that and make it into beads, wire wrap it, or put on bales and attach them that way. The shells, of course, we've been making beads out of for years. The abalone shell is always pretty when it's tumbled. You just drill a hole in it and hang it. There's not as many, we don't have this huge selection here of very colorful stones. I've got a bunch that's been polished from down south. I found a gentleman at a flea market that took big sur jade and sorry that he took big sur jade. He took big sur jade and hand polished them and sold the stones to people to make something out of. And then he took the harder stones and he tumbled them. So he tumbled the harder stones from around Big Sur. There are agates in here. There are all kinds of combination stones, some jaspers in there. But as you can see, if I was to take out the beads that he didn't find, the ones I threw in here, there's very earth tony colors in here. There's not any bright colors. So there are some pretty things to make beads out of. There's some.
Yeah, they're nice.
Some of these are petrified wood, but that's probably the only piece I've ever seen.
Wow.
From the ocean, because I don't think our neighborhood had the type of terrain we needed for petrified wood. I think petrified wood is a different climate and further away from the ocean and so forth to make petrified wood. Let me see if I've got a couple. Yeah, so they make great pieces of jewelry, but they are very hard. And so an indigenous person would use it as tools. I've seen arrowheads made out of the petrified wood. I've seen chisels made out of them. When I am teaching the flint and steel fire making class with my scout troop, we use slices of the petrified wood, the sharp edges off of them to cut the metal that we're sparking. But for the most part, the petrified wood is just really cool.
That's a petrified wood?
Yeah, that's a stump. It even has some of the growth rings running around it.
Wow.
And sometimes petrified wood looks more like a rough rock like this, but once it's sliced, you'll see some of the rings in it. The gentleman I got these from, his kids in Arizona, pick up petrified wood out in the desert. So it's the right type of thing. And in the washes and arroyos, most of the softer stones are all round and smooth, but the petrified wood has been turned into a quartz.
Wow.
It's much harder. So you get to know the colors and the shapes of them. So you'll be able to.
Very unique look.
It is a unique look. I believe here in California, we have our own petrified forest up near Napa somewhere. I'm not sure which county it is in, but you could look it up and you will find that they too have petrified wood that you can go and see. This is my biggest monster piece that I have here.
That's petrified wood.
Petrified wood weighs about 20 pounds. You can see some of
Wow.
the rings in it. Either that or the kids found this rock that looked like petrified wood and convinced me to buy it. Sometimes it's hard to tell because you want it to be a stone without testing it. And again, since it's in the quartz family, it could be tested as quartz and be a jasper and not necessarily petrified wood, or be an agate and not necessarily be petrified wood. So some of these things you just take for granted that they are what they say they are.
Yes, pretty fascinating.
I think it's neat. That's why I decided to do this instead of become a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or something like that, because I like beads. I like to swap and trade for beads. I like to sort things out. And so this is one of my many collections of things that I sort. So it is quite possible I might have ADD or ADHD. One of my obsessions is sorting.
So how long have you been doing this again?
I started in Boy Scouts with the Indian Lore Merit Badge. There, back when you were making items, Native American style items, and studying and learning about the different tribes. And we had a teacher that liked to do the seed bead work with the really, really tiny little glass trade bead. And we would make things with them. And I enjoyed doing that. And then I would research and go online to look up patterns and styles and what different tribes used for their artwork. And then while doing that, I discovered that they made things, all different types of things. And that got me more fascinated in finding and making. And then I'd have aunts that would buy junk at garage sales for themselves, and then anything that broke they would give me the loose beads, and then the neighbors found out I was dealing in beads and I'd get more. And so at some point I had 5 or 6 boxes of beads, and I would go online, not go online, they didn't have the internet. I'd go to the library and then look up bead history, try to figure out where the beads came from, because there was always someone trying to tell me they had a bead that was from the Spanish conquistador, and I didn't believe them. So I'd have to go online and look it up, figure out if anybody even had records of such thing. And there weren't. So you had to get pamphlets or books written about a museum that held such items and go through the pictures in hopes that somebody happened to take a picture of something that was brought over and you could see what the beads are. So
What
if
was
you can imagine doing research for another country without the internet in hopes that you found a book through interlibrary loan that somebody else had pictures of a museum somewhere.
what's the most expensive bead you've ever found or
Or
sold?
seen? Sold? I have sold a couple of $30 and $40 beads. They were really good reproductions of Roman era beads that were made by a glass blower, but they were expensive beads because he sold them as expensive, not necessarily because they were old. My theory is what my grandmother would call fast nickel. She would say you can buy something and turn it over and sell it quickly and make a little bit of money, and then keep doing that and add up your nickels that way. Or you could buy one big expensive thing, carry it around for a long time and hope somebody would buy it from you, and you'd make a large profit off of it. So most of the beads that I get are a less expensive bead that I could afford to sell inexpensively so somebody else could have a nice bead.
That's
And
pretty.
that is a very pretty one. If you were to look in the bead books about historical beads, you will see these in the Roman and Byzantine and the old books, the old pictures, the old drawings that they had, and old broken glass beads from archaeological sites. This one is a newly made bead out of Indonesia. They were making to look like the old ones. So this would be $1,000 bead if it was, or more, if it was in this good a condition and was 3,000 years old. But
Hmm.
instead, it is a reproduction and it is a $20 bead.
And that's a glass bead?
That is a glass bead, yes. This is another glass bead that is probably 200 years old. It's one of my older ones. It is made out of glass found in Murano, Italy, recently in the last 50 years. So there were canes, there were lengths of beads that were 3 feet long. They found hundreds of them buried under an old dump site, most likely buried during an invasion at some point to keep them from the invaders. Could have been World War I, could have been World War II, could have been even an older war. And they buried them, and whoever buried them wasn't around to tell anybody where the rods were buried. And they were found recently during excavating and renovating. and sold on auction, and people could buy $200 for a 3 foot long rod that was from the 17 or 1800s. And those guys would take and heat them up and cut them and trim them down and make beads. And so that was a authentic bead made from several 100-year-old material, but made in the last 20 years.
Hmm.
And
Nice.
so that is the thing. Refurbished beads. I've seen that on the market a couple of times. Somebody will have some really nice old beads, but they're not terribly expensive because they are currently being made out of old stock.
Hmm.
I probably have a couple of $100 beads in here, but there's nothing I'm willing to sell. They're my little fun collecting beads. So most of my beads, I try to keep the prices down so everybody can afford to get
Yes,
fast
yeah.
nickel. I'm a fast nickel as opposed to a slow dime person.
I was trying to figure out how you got so hooked on beads. And it's fascinating because once you become so enveloped into the history and all of the various aspects of beads, it becomes addicting.
It does. And I'm pretty sure that my having some type of neurotypical inclinations helps also, because I do find this fascinating. I find that beads were money, and beads were money before money was money, and everybody likes money. And if you don't have it, you got to find some other way of trading and bartering. And making jewelry is a way to make something you like to do and sell to make money so you can survive. And beads are one of the thing, finding something somebody else wants. It's kind of like a game now. I try to find something that I think somebody will buy and then seeing how long it takes for them to come in and find it. But yeah, it is fascinating. I like the sorting aspect. I will buy beads by the Ziploc bag and sort them out just so I have something to sort. That's why I have come up with a system using multiple spaghetti strainers, sieves, different hole sizes for different hole sizes of beads. I have figured a way of sorting out the flat Hishi beads by thickness, the ones that I make. I have worked with one of the kids in my scout troop who has a 3D printer and access to a 3D cutter, a laser cutter. Then we came up with a sorting tray that all of the beads slide to the bottom and fall through the smallest hole. Then you shift them up a level and they'll all fall through the next size bigger hole, and they shift. Anything bigger goes up to the next size and the next size. And so we found a way to sort, because not all seashells are the same thickness. And
Hmm.
I sell the thicker beads for more than I do the skinnier beads.
Yeah.
So again, that's part of sorting. It is just a thing. And this gentleman likes to make things and try out and experiment. So his is a want to build it to see if it can be done, and mine is a want to sort it and put it in a pile and see how many different types of beads I can get my hands on. So yeah, having a hobby that pays for itself, I believe is what my uncle said. His hobby was repairing farm equipment. He'd buy broken stuff at auction for $100. Him and his buddies would repair it. A couple months later, they'd take it back to auction, drive it back down to the auction place and sell it, and make their beer money out of it and have a good time. And then go buy some more items, and they'd always had machinery out in the backyard they were tinkering and fixing and reselling. I've met motorcycle people and car people the same way.
That's
So
nice.
you have a
Yeah.
hobby that pays for itself, you're doing good.
Yes. Yes. Well, Dean, it's very good to have you on. And can you give descriptions of your shop and where you're located, your address and contact?
I am currently located in the Begonia Plaza. That is 41st Avenue of Santa Cruz, Capitola, technically, Santa Cruz County. So you go down 41st Avenue. I'm on the left side, several blocks past the mall, across from O'Neill's. If you're familiar with O'Neill's, I am before the railroad tracks. I'm hidden in here. I have the smallest store in here, and there's a sign that says Beads out front. That's the extent of the signage. And I'm open every day but Sunday, unless one of my helpers that was coming in, like to help me work out, can't make it in. And so I would call first. We find that is our best motto. Call first to make sure I'm open. Our store number, see, the address here is 1220 Suite B, as in beads, just a coincidence, of 41st Avenue. You can Google it. You'll see a picture of my old cat as the store picture. So you'll know it's my store when you see the cat. Phone number here is 831-464-3221. And once again, that's the Begonia Plaza, Santa Cruz, 41st Avenue. And the phone number is, double check that because I don't call myself very often, is 464-3221. And every day but Sunday, unless you're going to spend a couple of $100, I'll show up on my day off for that. So I've only had that happen a couple of times, but it was well worth it when it does. So I'm not opposed to Sundays. I just like to have a day off to go make my beads. So that is me and the store.
Well, Dean, it's been fascinating talking to you today about beads and talking about oceanic beads that you get from the ocean, the shells and the sea glass, and the
Everything. Yeah, it's fun.
various tribes that have sold beads and traded in beads. And so I look forward to us doing this again. And thank you so much for coming on today.
You are
And
welcome. We lucked out and had a good time. And
oh, yeah.
interrupt.
Yes. Thank you so much again, Dean Smith from Paradise Beads. Thank you. Have a good one. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye bye.